Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Dellera, and it is Wednesday. We're in November, second month, so to speak, of the NBA season, and it's going to be a lot more fun. There's still a couple things that we're learning. These teams haven't even played 10 games yet, but we are going to try to talk about it from a little bit of a bird's eye perspective and what I'm seeing, what we're not seeing, what some of the adjusted ratings might be for these teams, and how we can maybe take a little bit of advantage of that. So one of the tools that there's a variety of tools that I really like to use, but one of the primary ones that I think you need to use is obviously the NBA Advanced website. So you just go to NBA. I usually like to look up you just look up teams advanced stats. And when you do that, it pulls up a variety of different metrics. And, you can look at traditional metrics, how many points teams getting, how many rebounds. Let me see if I can screen share this. That would be great, actually, right? So if you do this, we're doing this live right now. This is fun. Let's do it here. Okay. Now, right here, you see what I'm doing? We have the general website here. So you're looking at teams, general, traditional, see their record, points, rebounds, assists, totals, etc. I think this page is kind of important, at least from like a raw numbers perspective. You get a good idea of, who's taking a ton of shots, like Pacers taking a ton of shots, the Jazz getting the most rebounds, Kings getting the fewest rebounds, Raptors actually getting the most assists, Boston bottom of the barrel in terms of assists, which is interesting considering kind of where they were last year. But the part that I think is most interesting here, when I'm doing this anyway, is I'm looking at the advanced stuff. And I think advanced is probably one of the better tools that you can use when you're really doing anything in terms of the NBA. And the reason I say that is you get a little bit of a better picture in terms of how these teams are actually performing. You obviously have your offensive rating, you have your defensive rating, and you have net rating. These are three of the primary things that I think we talk about on a daily basis, or so to speak, when talking about the NBA, when talking about how teams are doing and how to quantify them and how to scale them against other teams. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that's fairly important to discuss and talk about. Okay, so one of my favorite things about looking at this site, and I think it's better as the season kind of goes on, is right now you only see what these teams are currently doing. So obviously, like Oklahoma City is going to be top notch in terms of net rating. They have a 7-0 record. They're undefeated. And generally, when you look at these, you can kind of get an idea of maybe, is this team fraudulent? Is this team, have they maybe had just like one blowout loss, or what the situation is? So looking at net rating, you don't see like a ton of outliers in terms of record. You're generally seeing better teams at the top. On the bottom, you've got your Brooklyn Nets, New Orleans Pelicans, Washington Wizards, all teams with double-digit negatives in terms of net rating. But like I said, early in the season, it does get to be a little bit difficult to determine just exactly how like good or bad these numbers actually are, because it doesn't really account for who they played, what the injuries are, etc. Smaller sample size is a little bit tougher. So one website that I really like to use is called Dunks and Threes. And Dunks and Threes, I think it's well worth the subscription, but I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a show here of what I'm looking at. And the reason I like this is that they have this thing called adjusted net rating, and everything is basically a derivative based off of strength of schedule. So Oklahoma City, they are 7-1. Their adjusted net is plus 7.9. Now, if you compare that to well, I guess they didn't really update it yet because this game happened a little while ago. But anyway, if you compare that to this game earlier today, they're at plus 13.1. So it doesn't necessarily account for some of the strength of schedule stuff. And I think that this is particularly important when you look at some other teams, like the New York Knicks, for example, fourth in adjusted net. They're 4-3 plus 4.3 in terms of adjusted net. If you look at them overall in the course of NBA.com, they're 10th. They're 4-3 plus 3.2. But because of their strength of schedule, they're getting a little bit of a boost here on Dunks and Threes. And I think that this is important because you're able to see maybe there's a time early on in the season where a team's numbers don't really look that great from an advanced metrics perspective. But if you start accompanying it with some of the strength of schedule determinations and some of the strength of schedule changes, you can get a better idea for just how good or how bad this particular team is. So you're generally still going to see the same teams like at the top and the bottom. Like Brooklyn's still at the bottom, Washington, New Orleans, they're all still bottom of the barrel teams. But some teams that might kind of surprise you are, Boston is 3-5 and Orlando is even 3-5. Orlando's ninth in adjusted net. They're plus 1.8. And Orlando, we've talked about having a ton of different difficulties this season. They've really struggled to coalesce. They've really struggled to kind of come together. And with that in mind, this might be an opportunity where we look at this and we go, they should be able to turn the corner. Maybe we can bet on them. Maybe it's not catch the falling knife, but we should be expecting a little bit more of a regression to the mean, which I think is important early in the season, that we don't overreact to anything and we don't change our priors too much. Now, one of the other things that I think is really different about this site that I really like is NBA Advanced. I'll show you here. On NBA Advanced, they have pace, and they just have pace for the overall team. It's just their full pace numbers, which is fine. And I think that for most people, this is kind of all you really need. Like if you're looking at it from a little bit of like a more cursory perspective, right? But dunks and threes, what I like here is that they have your overall pace, and the overall pace is going to align with what you see on NBA.com. But what they have that's different is they have offensive possession length and defensive possession length, which is average seconds per possession, right? And I think this is important when you're looking at matchups and you're trying to figure out different style things. And you said, okay, well, here, for example, Miami, they're number one in pace, but it's not because of the defense. The defense is actually really slow. And where they find a lot of their speed and a lot of their pace is on the offensive side of the ball. They're almost a full second faster than the next team in terms of offensive possession length. So I think that is something that's absolutely notable. Additionally, kind of on the flip side, you have the Clippers, who are 29th in pace, and they're 30th in offensive possession length. So they have the longest offensive possessions, but they're fourth in terms of defense. They're allowing teams to kind of speed them up, which I think is interesting. And it's something to kind of take note of when you have some of these matchups that, if that's whether it's stylistic or it's intentional or not, it's just something that tends to happen. Like the Lakers and the Detroit Pistons are two teams that are also slow offensively and then much, much faster on the defensive side of the ball. Part of that can be due to transition opportunities that they're allowing. It can be due to turnovers that they allow that kind of speed that up. But it's always something that you want to kind of look at and you kind of want to clock when making some of these determinations for not only is this going to be a fast-paced game, but how many opportunities are these teams going to get in this matchup? Or does it align with what this other team or what the opponent kind of wants to do in the first place? And looking at that even further, which team is going to be able to better dictate their pace, their game, their preferred style of play during the course of this game? So just a couple of the things that I like to look at, a couple of the tools that I think are really important, and I would recommend using, at least at this juncture, and then moving forward throughout the season. And just as a point of clarity, because I was talking about that, the Thunder being 7-1, I'm recording this during the game, so I'm wondering if dunks and threes was maybe pulling from what the current score was rather than the full game score. So leave some of the specific numbers up in the air for now, but definitely something to kind of keep an eye on moving forward. Anyway, let's talk about this Wednesday slate. We have got a pretty good slate, a lot of games on today, and I want to start just kind of right off the top. One of the matchups that we're looking at that is obviously going to be pretty compelling is the New York Knicks versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's always an interesting game when you have players playing against their former team, whether in this matchup, you got obviously Karl Anthony Towns. You also have Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo playing in this one. So definitely going to be an interesting spot. The key piece of news that we really need to pay attention for is Mikal Bridges, is Anthony Edwards going to play? He was upgraded. I think that guys generally want to play at the Garden. They generally kind of get up for those games. So we'll see if Ant can play. If in the event that he is able to go, I think that that's obviously notable. And it's definitely something that would affect the spread. It would affect the totals. And it's obviously going to affect a variety of different player props. The one player on the Knicks that may not go. Mitchell Robinson is again on the injury report. It wouldn't totally shock me to see him sit, although he's been playing really in both ends, or at least one of the ends of a back-to-back. This isn't a back-to-back set. He sat on Monday against the Wizards. He's still on a minutes restriction, and he sat out not due to injury, but due to rest-related reasons, because that was the second game of a back-to-back. Here, this game against Minnesota, although it's not a back-to-back for New York, the Knicks don't play again until Sunday against Brooklyn at home. So it could be a good opportunity to basically give Mitch like a whole week off. He was already going to miss the game, obviously, against the Wizards. They didn't need him in that game. But I do wonder if they maybe want to try to bring him out here against Minnesota, maybe sit him against Brooklyn. They really don't need him there, and then save him maybe for the following Tuesday, Wednesday, when they have a back-to-back set with the Memphis Grizzlies and the Orlando Magic. So it's always a little bit of a guessing game with Mitchell Robinson's history and whether he's going to play or not. But I do think that that gives us a little bit of opportunity here to bet around that. So if lines are opened up, Karl-Anthony Towns has actually been really solid as a rebounder on the season, almost regardless of the situation. He has been recording rebounds at a rate where you would be a little bit surprised given the fact that he's obviously not above his 13 that he kind of was last year. But when we look at what he's doing this season, he's been great. 11, 13, 18, 12, 10, 15, 13 rebounds. So we'll have to see. I think this is opening up right now. I'm seeing a minus 142 on FanDuel for 11 and a half rebounds for Cat. I think that that's honestly a decent bet. When we look at the matchup against Minnesota, he had 20 rebounds against them last year. So I think that the 11 and a half is still solid. And I think it's pretty heavily juiced though. So I'd hope that it can open up on a different book before we really have to get down on it. But I do think that Cat is somebody that kind of gets up for these games against his former team. Rudy Gobert is not necessarily somebody who is going to get him into foul trouble. And obviously if Mitch doesn't play, then we have a lot more ceiling in terms of his rebounding than if Mitchell Robinson does play. So I definitely like the look for Karl-Anthony Towns over 11 and a half rebounds. I was looking again at Jalen Brunson. I think one of the things with Brunson is this is a little bit of a tougher matchup, I think, for him size-wise, especially if Anthony Edwards plays and Ant is maybe going to get him into either, a little bit of foul trouble, maybe, but I think it's also a little bit harder for Brunson to defend if Ant has the ability to kind of switch a little bit more onto him. I would be looking though I think Jaden McDaniels has been really, really good for Minnesota, and he's somebody that I want to wait for to see what the news is for Anthony Edwards. On the season, he's been pretty solid, but he's kind of turned it up over the past couple of games with 22 points, 14, 30, and 25 in his last 4 games. Definitely getting a lot more usage, definitely getting a lot more run. And I would probably be looking at threes. One of the things for New York has been that they're not necessarily the best in terms of their rotation. So if I can get over 1.5 threes for McDaniels, I really don't mind that at all. Over the past couple of games, he has been not taking a ton of threes, but he's making them. He's been 2 for 3, 2 for 2, 3 for 4. But in this spot against New York, I do think it's a good opportunity for him. He made 2 in both games against New York last year, took 6 shots in both of those games as well, or 6 threes rather. I think that New York just kind of tends to allow some of those shots. The defense doesn't cooperate. The defense doesn't communicate properly. And he's somebody that can kind of take advantage of that. So definitely would be looking at McDaniels, but I think I want to wait to find out what Ant's status is for sure, because I think that if Ant is out, then we probably get an opportunity to maybe just bet points. If Ant is in, then I think we're probably going to get a better line on the 2+ threes, and I think the usage will still remain there for Jaden McDaniels in this spot. There have been some pretty bad vibes coming out of Memphis lately. Some of the commentary is really all the commentary is about Ja Morant, and he was suspended for conduct detrimental to the team, missed the game, came back still like kind of unengaged, and when their reporters are asking him about like what's going on, how are you doing, how is basketball fun, he's just like, and I think it is interesting because we're kind of in a situation now where what does Memphis do, right? Memphis kind of made a decision last year and even in this offseason when they made a move where they get rid of the head coach. And then they basically say, we're going to install an offense that is what you want to run. It's going to be heavy pick and roll. You're going to have the ball in your hands. We are going to give you the keys to the offense. Then you have Desmond Bane leaving in the offseason. And that is in part because the team really kind of was maxed out in terms of where they were going to go with Morant, Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. And then now you have the situation where Memphis is pretty ass, to be honest with you. Memphis is 3-5 on the season. They have a minus 1.8 adjusted net rating, which is 22nd, and they're still playing fast. They're playing at the 6th fastest pace in the league. So they're playing fast. They're keeping their opponents running with them, and that has not necessarily been a good thing for Memphis. In this game now, they're playing the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are 7.5-point favorites on the road, and Houston playing at a much, much slower pace. They're playing at the 28th pace, so the third slowest pace in the NBA. They have the second best offense, second best defense, and second best adjusted net rating overall. This team is an absolute wagon. They are monsters on the defensive side of the ball. And even though they're not the most cohesive yet, offensively, the offense is still humming. I think they still have a lot of room to grow, but I think that this is still a team that should be able to dominate in this matchup. So the Rockets are 7.5-point favorites. I would kind of lean that way. But the one player that I want to target is Ja Morant, and I want to grab under 3.5 rebounds. Now, it's a really low line. He just had 5 against the Detroit Pistons last game. And when I'm looking at this, part of why I kind of like this play is I'm looking at, what is he doing? What is his role? And then not only that, but how many chances did he really get in this game? So against the Detroit Pistons, he had 5 rebounds on 6 rebound chances. Great conversion rate. Even in this season, he's only had more than 3.5 in 2 games. And in the other game that he had was against the Phoenix Suns, also a team that's wildly underperforming this season. But he had 8 rebounds on 11 chances. Still converted a lot of his chances, which is a little bit more of a surprising thing here. Part of why I like him to go under the 3.5 in this matchup against the Houston Rockets is that Rockets, a lot of length, a lot of size. Ja Morant, not exactly the biggest dude either. But when you look at Houston in terms of their rebounding percentage and their rebounding rate, they've been not only very solid this season, they're allowing their opponents 51.7 rebounds per game this season, which is tied for, or give or take, 11th in the NBA. I think in part that's because the defense is so good, so they're getting a couple extra opportunities maybe on the offensive side of the ball. But looking at Morant, you have a guy who is clearly very disinterested in the game of basketball right now, at least playing in terms of playing for Memphis. And while he might, be able to light his own fire under his ass, rebounding has still never necessarily been his strong suit. He's averaging 3.6 rebounds per game this season, but a lot of it has to do with that 8 rebound game against the Phoenix Suns. Other than that, obviously anything under, it's a 3.5 line, it's pretty low. There's always going to be a certain element of sweatiness to that. But I do think that, if you're not feeling it, you're not really going for it with your team, coupled with the fact that I think this is a good matchup for this under. But I do think that it's a spot where rebounds are an effort stat to me, especially for smaller players like Ja Morant, who's at the guard position. You're going to get 1 or 2 that maybe just happen to come your way. But for the most part, rebounds are an effort stat. If you're not giving effort, you're not picking up those rebounds. So I'm going to grab under 3.5 rebounds. There's a big plus money number out there right now. I'm seeing plus 115 at the time of this recording at DraftKings. So the next game we've got is the Wizards versus the Celtics. Just kind of a gross game this season. But I do think that there is a little bit of value to be had in this matchup. One of the guys that I've been really disappointed with over the course of the season has been Derek White. Derek White has really just been unable to scale even in this expanded role. So he's getting the opportunities, but it just isn't really converting into more points, more assists, more rebounds, more threes. We're kind of still at the same numbers and the efficiency is down. And I think in part that's because Jaylen Brown is just not Tatum. Tatum, I think, is a little bit of a better facilitator, but also Derek White is getting a lot more defensive attention, being tasked with being a much bigger role in the offense. And I think that he's just struggling with that. which is unfortunate because I was kind of excited to see what he was going to be able to do this year and see whether or not maybe he can contend for most improved, get an all-star nod, anything. Not really happening so far. Still early, but kind of tough spot for him. Jaylen Brown has looked great, I think, though, for Boston, averaging 26.8 points per game. It's coming off a 36-point performance against the Utah Jazz. And what I'm a little bit interested in here is that I would think that this would be a good spot for him against the Wizards. I think that he can kind of excel in this particular matchup here. I think he's great in transition. I think that he is great from beyond the arc, especially this season he's been. I think that he is able to get downhill, get to the rim, get into the paint, get into the teeth of the defense. His line's at 24.5, which I don't mind this look, but I do think that I want to pivot to somebody else. I want to pivot to Neemias Queta, who I think has been really underrated so far this season for the Celtics, kind of being asked to take on a pretty big responsibility here. And I'm going to grab his over 16.5 PR. I think that this line is a little bit light. He just had 17 against the Utah Jazz, which I think was a much tougher matchup, kind of given what they have from the center position anyway. But I do think this is a good opportunity for him for a number of different reasons. Number one, from the rebounds aspect of this, looking at this particular match against Washington, Washington allows the 9th most rebounds per game to their opponents. They are allowing 57.1 rebounds to their opponents. Then when we look at this from a pace aspect, Washington plays at the second fastest pace in the NBA. I think that they're going to effectively be able to speed up Boston. Boston's playing at the 30th pace in the league. While I do think that Boston has a better offensive scheme, I think that the Boston is a little bit better able to dictate exactly how the game is going to go just because the coaching is better. I do think that Washington, just with the way that they kind of want to run and gun, is going to be conducive to Queta's kind of gameplay here. Queta's a guy that can get up and down the floor, very athletic, excellent in terms of being able to get up and down the floor and run with other players, run with other teams. I do think that when we look at what he's going to be able to do, though, on the offensive side of the ball, we're also in a good position here with Queta. Queta is a guy great in pick and roll, and specifically as the roll man, and he's been really solid in the restricted area. And I think this is a spot against the Wizards where, you have Alex Sarr, who is like fine defensively, but he's still kind of getting there. He's still growing as an individual. Queta's like got some grown man strength here. And when we look at this matchup in terms of points in the paint allowed, Washington is one of the worst. They allow some of the most points per game in the paint, and that's basically where Queta lives. At 16.5, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for him to not only grab some rebounds, but also be able to maybe get a couple putbacks, get a couple rolls in there. And I think that there's a plus 519 for his double-double. You got to build it out a little bit, but this is the game that I think that Queta is going to maybe be able to excel. 16.5 PR is a little bit light. I don't mind if you kind of shop it and you said, well, maybe I'll just do 20 plus or 25 PR or something to that degree instead of double-double. But I think that the double-double price at plus 519, make sure you build it out and check out the 10 and 10, see how that looks. I think it's a great opportunity for Queta against this Washington Wizards team. So a couple injury updates too. Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler both seem to be a little bit in flux in terms of their status for tomorrow. Jimmy Butler for his back. Steph Curry said that he's sick, and his status for today's game anyway is a little bit uncertain. I think that that's important for us to look at real quick in terms of who may or may not will fill that kind of void in. So the matchup for them is against the Kings. The Kings are 2-point underdogs right now. I would imagine that this is going to flip if Curry and Jimmy can't go. But looking at the usage, if you look at who kind of gets the bump when Curry is out this season, the player that sees the biggest jump is Jimmy Butler, also out. But Butler sees a jump from 19 or basically 20 to 29 in terms of his usage percentage. Podziemski sees the next biggest jump from 12 to 20. And Kuminga follows with 21 to 28. I would expect Kuminga to play heavy minutes against this Kings team if Curry and Jimmy Butler are unable to go. From a usage perspective, without Jimmy Butler on the season, we are seeing really the biggest jump again goes from Curry. Curry actually sees a little bit of a drop without Jimmy Butler, which I think is interesting. But we do see Kuminga again getting a massive jump from 18 to 26. Al Horford also sees a pretty significant jump from 12 to 20 in terms of usage. Kuminga is going to be the guy. I don't know where his lines are going to be, but I would imagine that if we get a PRA line that's anything under 30 and they're both out, I'm probably going to want to be jumping on that. He's going to have plenty of opportunity to excel. Draymond has historically not performed particularly well without Steph Curry on the floor. He sometimes can step up from a rebounding perspective and a scoring perspective, but the assists aren't necessarily there in the same way. So definitely something to kind of keep an eye out for in that game against the Sacramento Kings. Finally, looking at this matchup, well, two things, because as another note, the Thunder played the Trailblazers second game of back-to-back. A lot of guys kind of returning. Wouldn't shock me if Chet sits this game out against the Trailblazers. So, keep that in mind when you're looking at this game. The market also seems to either agree with that or they're buying a little bit more of the Trailblazers. Line opened at Oklahoma City -5.5. Now seeing some -4.5s in the market. Finally, looking at the Spurs versus the Lakers, Victor kind of had one of his first really bad games in a long time last time out. 9 points, 9 rebounds, kind of was in some foul trouble. And one of the things that was notable was that they basically kind of gave him the like Kevin Durant-ish treatment where he couldn't get the ball. Like the ball just wasn't getting to him and they were having trouble getting him the ball effectively where he could do anything with it. He's too big, too strong, too good for this to happen. I don't know, like JJ Redick, I think is a good enough coach where he could kind of coach the same thing. I also don't know if that's something that they're necessarily going to want to try to deploy this early in the season against him. I think that's something where maybe you show it on a possession or two, but overall for the course of the entire game, not totally convinced that the Lakers are going to do that here. So I think that Wemby should be able to have a bounce get back game. Don't know if I want to buy it, but something to consider. And then the other prop that was kind of looking at me was Luka Doncic's rebounds. He said double-digit rebounds in every single game this season. I do think there's maybe a little bit of room for regression. His rebound chances are, some of them are particularly low. One game, I think he had 11 rebounds and 11 rebound chances. So he basically converted on all of them. He does historically convert at a little bit of a higher rate than you would expect. Either way, definitely something I kind of want to stay away from, even though I was kind of drawn to it a little bit just based on the hit rate chart. And I think that that's one of the things that I want to talk about finally is hit rate charts. One of the things that we always look at, and I think it's used in, it makes good content for sure. When we talk about player props as well, especially, it's like, oh, this happened in X out of the last 10 games or X games out of however many in the last couple seasons against this particular team in this particular matchup. I do it. A lot of people do it. It's fine. But I also think that it's just part of your analysis. And one of the things that you kind of have to remember is, yeah, maybe this line has hit in 9 of its last 10 games. The line wasn't at this spot in 9 of the last 10 games. And I think that's always important to remember and to remain cognizant of, because these lines move. The books are changing the lines every game. And if they're not, there's a couple different reasons for that. But one of them could just be the projections the same. And, maybe it's a similar matchup. Maybe it's a similar pace or defensive style or whatever, right? There's a variety of reasons why the number can remain the same. Or it could go up or it could go down. And to kind of take just the hit rate in a vacuum is dangerous. I don't recommend it. I don't think that you should do that either. And I think that, maybe it's a way where you can look at something and say like, oh, that's weird. Like, I can't believe this player has hit this prop in 10 straight games. And you can kind of dig into it a little bit more and say like, well, why? What was different? Did those teams play at a faster pace? Did they have bad defense? Were they a bad rebounding team? Did they allow a lot of assists? Did they, did they blitz the pick and roll handler? What did they do? Those are all things that you kind of need to consider when you're just betting strictly off of a hit rate chart. And that's part of why I really don't recommend doing only that. There's so much other information. There's so much more nuance to it. And if you don't think that a sports book also has like a hit rate chart, then that's insane. That's wild. And, even if, let's say you're trying to do a builder, I hate it. I hate the terminology, right? Let's say you're trying to do a builder. Players made 1 3 in 20 games in a row. You're going to pay out the ass for that, and it's not going to be priced properly. So just because something hits like every game for 10 games does not necessarily mean that the next time it's going to also happen again. It doesn't mean that the odds that it happens again are like a coin flip. That's not how it works. These are all independent events. The way that they're contingent or not independent or dependent events rather is if maybe because somebody's playing well, then they get more minutes, they get a little bit more trust, their rotation changed, they joined the starting lineup, somebody got hurt then the next game. Those are all reasons where you could say, okay, well, there is a reason for that prior matchup or the prior result to impact this next game. But I can guarantee you that hitting a prop 10 times in a row on whatever this current line is doesn't really mean anything for this game in particular. I think it makes good content. I think that it's catchy, but I don't think that that is necessarily the thing that you need to be looking at. And I think that we run into this issue all the time where we talk about this happened in X amount of games or whatever. I think that it works for a couple different reasons. One, it lets me kind of sometimes convey a point to you in a little bit of a more expeditious manner. I don't need to go into all of the reasons why like this matchup is maybe different or similar than some of the prior ones. And I think that it's just easier to digest. It's easier for people to understand. You know, there is a lot of other underlying data that's being looked at besides just that. But I do think that from it's almost like a sales perspective or from a pitch perspective, you can understand it a little bit cleaner. It's like, well, look, they hit this in 10 straight games. The reason that it's hitting in 10 straight games is because they're getting up. Like, let's say it's 2 threes. They're getting up 10 a game. It's going to happen. The volume's there. Their shooting average is there. If they go 1 for 10, it just happens too. But as long as the price is right, you can continue to bet some of these juiced props if you want to. But I don't think that just using, again, to bring it back to the point, I don't think that just using raw hit rate is a strong method of building a builder, for example. I don't really like them in the first place. I think the hold is too much. And, I think that there's a lot more nuance that goes into player prop betting that is part of why you come to me. You come to the people that are the experts in this, that you seek out some more information. You do a little bit more of your own research. It's part of why I started the show off talking about some tools that I like to use and that can give you a little bit of an extra look at whatever you're doing or a little bit of an extra analysis for the plays that you do or not or don't like. So that's just kind of my rant about hit rate charts and why they can matter and why sometimes they don't matter at all at the same time. So as for pods and recs, before we get you out of here, pods and recs, I'm going to recommend, I got some Govee permanent Christmas lights put up in my house and they are unbelievable. I am a decorator of Christmas like immediately after Halloween. It's way too much work for 1 month only. I just am going to do it before Thanksgiving. And number one, the weather's better to put it up. But I'm very happy with these permanent lights. I can control them with my phone, which is sick. I can change the color. They can go for every holiday. Just they're really awesome. They're super bright, and I get to leave them there because they're permanent. So really thrilled with this purchase and couldn't recommend something more so far. I've had them up for a couple days and I am thrilled with the results. So gonna recommend permanent Christmas lights. Just them for the holidays. You could do Halloween, you could do St. Patrick's Day, 4th of July, Veterans Day, thank you for your service, et cetera, et cetera. So just plenty of good options with the permanent Christmas lights. But guys, appreciate you guys coming here. Appreciate you guys listening. Make sure to continue to rate, download, review. And I'm going to throw a discount for the huddle, obviously down here in the bio as well. If you'd like to join, make sure you get all the plays first at the best lines so you can continue to cash that.